From 1986 to 1990, a small community in Louisiana was shaken by a series of disappearances involving teenage girls and young women. By 1990, after multiple cases happened close together, people began to notice patterns. Some of the victims shared similar appearances. A few were last known to be using a phone, including public payphones, around the time they vanished. Some were the teenage daughters of military families stationed nearby, and others were new to the area. As the community tried to make sense of it, many believed the cases had to be all connected, but over time, arrests would show something more complicated. These disappearances were not all the work of a single person. Some of these cases have since been solved and others remain cold, and one woman is still missing. Her name is Bambi. Today, I'm focusing on her case, but to understand it, we also have to look at the others, where they stand, what connects them, and what does not. Because it raises a bigger question. How did a town of just 5,000 people experience this much loss in such a short period of time? I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved disappearance of Bambi Brantley. At the top of this episode, I just wanted to thank you all as listeners. This week, I hit my 2-year anniversary with the podcast, and without all of you listening, sharing, helping it grow, I wouldn't be in the position to be doing the work I'm doing now. I'm an indie podcaster who researches, writes, promotes, records, edits, all the things myself at the moment. So your support means everything, and it really helps me to get the podcast to reach more people. So if you haven't already, go leave an Apple review or rate me on Spotify and share the podcast on social media. So just thank you again. And now on to today's episode. I somewhat came across Bambi's case on accident. Even though I cover older cases, I still very much follow more recent ones. And if you're on the Instagram page, you know I will share missing persons flyers and other podcast episodes on modern cases. So on a walk one day, I have my earbuds in and I'm listening to a podcast on the Jeff Davis 8. If you're unfamiliar, between 2005 and 2009, 8 women were found dead in and around Jennings, Louisiana. Their names were Loretta, Ernestine, Whitney, Laconia, Kristen, Brittany, Crystal, and Hannah. And as their deaths unfolded and in the aftermath, patterns emerged. Some of the women knew each other. Some were last seen in the same areas, and several were found in or around canals or rural roads. And for a time, many people believed one person had to be responsible. But over the years, the answers, like in this case, became more complicated. Some cases led to arrests, others did not, and questions about how these investigations were handled only added to the uncertainty. So there's not one clear explanation. It's quite a bit to read up on. And so that's what I do. That's how my brain works. So after I listened to the episode, I began to read up further. And I thought, I wonder if there's any cases similar to this elsewhere in Louisiana. And what I found was no, not just like that. This is unique. However, between 1986 and 1990, there were a handful of cases, all within this town of 5,000 people. And like the Jeff Davis 8, these victims had a lot of overlap. Leesville, Louisiana is in western Louisiana, and it's a tiny town that sits right next to Fort Johnson, which at the time was known as Fort Polk, a major U.S. Army base that brings in a steady flow of military families in and out of the area. So while Leesville itself is small and tight-knit, there is also this constant movement on the edges of it. By the way, I went back and forth about this, about whether I should call it Fort Johnson or Fort Polk throughout the course of this episode. And even though I completely respect why there has been the name change to Fort Johnson, I've decided to call it Fort Polk because that's what it was called at the time. And if I'm trying to jog people's memories and people who may have lived in the area for a short period of time, I want to refer to it by a name that would be familiar from the time. Because of the military base, there was a decent job market nearby compared to other areas. So, in addition to military families, other people moved to the area for work. And that's exactly what 25-year-old Bambi Luann Brantley was doing when she moved to the area in early 1986. Bambi previously lived in the Bartlett, Tennessee area, but had recently gone through a difficult breakup. Her older brother Roddy lived down in Leesville at the Tower Trailer Park. I'll have this mapped out for you on Instagram, but it's located off Louisiana Highway 8 near Anderson Avenue. Roddy and Bambi shared one vehicle, and they also had another roommate in the home. This person has never been named publicly, but we know it's a female roommate. Bambi had a pretty vibrant social life, and her family said she was really friendly. She had gotten a job at a place called the Pines Auto Dealership, and she liked to go out on the social scene. She went to the bars, and based on reporting, it sounds like she had at least somewhat of a boyfriend at the time. I don't know how serious they were. On the night of Wednesday, October 22nd, 1986, Roddy had the car, and Bambi was back at the home with the third roommate. According to this roommate, Bambi asked her to give her a ride over to a nearby convenience store across Highway 8. Now, again, I'll have this mapped out for you, but it's an easily walkable distance. In fact, she does walk home, but my guess is she just wanted to get over to the store quickly because she had a phone call to make. This roommate brought her over to what was known as Super Sam's at the time and nowadays is known as Lebo's, and this was at 10:05 p.m. This is an older case, so there are little details that vary account by account over the years, and I know you guys are used to that at this point hearing these cases. So I'm going to present both accounts to you, and it's possible that the true circumstances are completely one of these things or a combination of both. In both situations and scenarios that have been recounted, workers at the store do remember her purchasing a drink and making a phone call there at 10:05 p.m. According to the most recent reports, she called her brother there that night, and she called where she knew he was going to be, the Pit Grill, and she asked him to bring the car back to her so she could take it to go out with her boyfriend. The store clerk said she was on the phone until roughly 10:30 and then left. And just so you can picture it, the phone was one of those that was outside of the convenience store. They then said they saw her cross back over the highway and walk in the direction of Anderson Ave, which is where the trailer home was off of. Now, here is what differs. The later source material states that all of this was one phone call. And then her brother comes home, he brings her the car, and he sees the drink sitting there, but no Bambi. So he's like, that's kind of odd. But he leaves the car, he gets a ride back to the Pit Grill, and then he finds it odd. He gets back later on in the early morning hours. The vehicle is still there, but she isn't there, and the drink is where she left it. Original early source material states that there is the 10:05 to 10:30 phone call with someone. We don't know who, maybe her boyfriend. Probably not her brother, though. He doesn't place it at that time. And then there's a secondary phone call to the Pit Grill at midnight. This is from an unknown location. And she asked for her brother, and that's when she asked for him to bring the car back. He does so, and then it's the same scenario as before. It's just that it's just after midnight. He brings the car back. He gets a ride back to the Pit Grill, but she's not home at that point, and the beverage is still sitting there. And for what it's worth, these early timelines were provided by the Sheriff's Department spokesperson. Now, to me personally, this second scenario makes more sense because 10:05 to 10:30 is a long phone call to say, please bring the phone back. Okay, bye. Especially if your brother's out partying that night, hanging out. Doesn't make sense. That, and there's pretty good evidence that she made it home after that first call. There's the beverage sitting there. But with this second scenario, what if something happened to her after making that second phone call? Here's the thing. Police knew about this second phone call from her brother, Roddy. He was the one who said when he got it, where he got it, what the timeline was, who gave him a ride home, and then that person was able to speak to it as well. But what they didn't know was where she made the call from. They didn't know. Nobody at the convenience store recalled seeing her there a second time, just that first time from 10:05 to 10:30. And we have to assume that the trailer did not have a phone because that's why she had the roommate drive her there in the first place. Now, is it possible? I've thought this through. Is it possible that whoever was working at the convenience store just didn't notice her a second time because she didn't come in and purchase anything and she was just outside? I don't know. It's a possibility. That definitely could be. And if that's the case, she could have made that call to her brother, then went to walk back home, and that's when the abduction happened. And of course, it's possible that somebody showed up to the trailer itself. We just don't know. And if you're like me, you're wondering, okay, well, what about this roommate? Could this third roommate say that she ever made it home? And that's never come out. So I don't know if the roommate just wasn't home that night after that, like if they went out themselves after dropping her at the payphone. I really don't know, but this roommate seemingly didn't provide a better timeline that helped move the case along in any way. So if you're thinking that, so was I, but I couldn't find anything definitively on that. If you do know, if you are that roommate, if you're someone, I'm happy to edit this episode and add that in later, so just get in touch with me. If you go to the show notes, I have all of the old archived newspaper articles in the source notes, so go check them out. You can read about the variants of events for yourself and see what you think. After this, the information ties back together pretty consistently. Bambi does not show up for work at the car dealership that next morning, and her brother reports her missing later that day to police. Some sources randomly list her as December 22nd going missing. That's absolutely inaccurate because there are actual newspaper articles from late October with information about her going missing. I just wanted to clarify that there, though, because if you go on certain websites, they will say December 22nd of that year is her missing persons date, and that's just flat out wrong. Bambi came from a big family, and they quickly rallied to try to find her and get information out there. They went store to store in town, they hung flyers. It was one of those scenarios where everyone was talking about it in town, but in 1986, there was not the same national response to something like this happening. So the coverage outside of the local area was pretty minimal. At first, law enforcement wasn't sure if she went off on her own or not, but her family never thought so. She had no history of running off without telling anyone, and she had a great social life there, and she wasn't a known drug user. She didn't have a history of anything that would lead them to believe she would do this. Still, there were no leads early on, so just 2 months after she went missing, a $5,000 reward for information was put up, which is the equivalent of about $15,000 today. When Bambi still didn't show up and the days stretched into weeks, her missing posters became a constant presence around town. And like in a lot of small communities, people started talking and rumors began to spread. In May of 1987, over 6 months after she went missing, the Leesville Daily Leader addressed one such rumor that seemed to be the most prevalent. And that was that Bambi's body was placed in an elevated water storage tank in town. It was also shared that the head of public health would be making some big announcement about the discovery of the body that same week. The public works director at the time, a man named Sonny Martin, told the press that he went up there himself just so he could prove the rumors were not true. He also said that police regularly patrol the area and that the tanks had a series of locks that would prevent unauthorized persons from gaining access. And I will say it did seem elaborate. First, there is an outside gate on the fence that surrounds the tank that is locked. If you somehow get past that, there's a ladder that has to be used to get up to a trapdoor, which is also secured. The ladder to get into this 150-pound trapdoor is not kept on site. But even if you do get beyond that, on the other side of the trapdoor is a caged ladder which leads to a subsequent locked door that finally gives access to the water. So given all these steps, this seems like an unlikely place for someone to dispose of a body. Authorities in Leesville were concerned by this rumor for a couple of reasons. For one, it was traumatizing and hurtful for Bambi's family members to have to think about her being in that water tank when she wasn't. And on the flip side, they may think they're at least about to get some answers when, in fact, they were not. In addition to that, they had concerns that teens and curious townspeople may try to breach the water tank to see for themselves. As such, they made sure to remind readers of the paper that at minimum, people could be charged with criminal trespassing just for coming onto the property, and if they continued on with their quest, they could face charges such as criminal mischief, criminal damage to property, and so forth. After this, Bambi's name would still be talked about around town, but the case into her disappearance grew cold. In fact, it never really warmed up. From the get-go, police reported that they had absolutely no leads and no direction to take this case. She didn't have any problems in her life, no jilted exes in the area, no problems with people at work or in her home. So time seemed to pass, and they just hoped they would catch a break. The town of Leesville started to get back into a routine until November of 1988, when a brazen abduction ended in tragedy. At around 4:15 in the morning on Monday, November 21st, 1988, a newspaper delivery man entered the Circle K in Leesville to find it empty. The Circle K was on an access road that led into Fort Polk. Concerned, they called police, who sensed something was not right when they got there. All the money was missing from the cash register, and it was unlike the store clerk, 21-year-old Karen Hill, to just abandon the store. The search for Karen had barely started when, at 8:38 a.m. that same morning, some locals hunting 3.5 miles south of Fort Polk located a body in the wooded area. It was determined right away that this was the body of Karen. Karen had lived in the area for just over a year, and she was the wife of an Army sergeant stationed at Fort Polk. Karen was loved by her community and colleagues. One coworker told the paper, quote, "She was an exceptional person, really outgoing. Everybody is really torn up about it." The Circle K was closed early that Monday morning of the abduction and murder, but surprisingly, it reopened that very same night, which is just wild to me, but I digress. Detective Kenneth Williams told the media, quote, "Somebody somewhere drove past that store and saw who was there. I want anybody, if they stopped there to buy gas and nobody came to the pump, please come tell us," end quote. And before long, they were able to piece together a bit of the timeline of events because customers had come in and out of the store throughout that late evening and early overnight part of her shift. Typically, the store had 2 workers, but this Sunday night, they only had 1, and Karen was actually filling in for a coworker. She wasn't even scheduled to work that night. But the real timeline was built because of one of Karen's military spouse friends. You see, just after her shift had started, a friend of Karen's called her. Her name was Tammy, and Tammy had gone into labor and was hoping that Karen could talk to her and distract her during that early parts of her labor. It was not her first baby. This was not her first rodeo, and she just wanted to kill some time before she went to the hospital. And that once her labor had progressed enough for her to go to the hospital, she was going to be stopping by the Circle K to drop off her keys to Karen so that when Karen got off of work, she could go babysit her older children. According to Tammy, they spoke from about 11:45 p.m. through most of the shift. If a customer came to check out, Karen would put down the phone and help the customer, and then she'd go back to talking and comforting Tammy, which is just so sweet. One such customer was a deputy who stopped by a little after 3 a.m. to check on Karen and grab a cup of coffee. It wasn't and still isn't uncommon for law enforcement to keep an eye on store clerks, especially women who are working overnight alone in these types of roles. Karen and Tammy, they kept talking until Tammy knew she had to get to the hospital. So she hung up the phone, she grabbed her bags, and she dropped the key to Karen at 3:40 a.m. And that was the last time anybody spoke to Karen. At 4:25 a.m., the call came into police when the newspaper delivery man found the store empty. So sometime between when Tammy dropped off the key at 3:40 and the newspaper man came at 4:25, someone came in and robbed the store and abducted Karen from there. By just after 8 a.m., she was dead. The person who did this had sexually assaulted Karen, tied her to a tree, and shot her in the eye at point-blank range. Authorities believed she had been standing as she was tied next to the tree and that she slumped down after being shot. Karen's husband, friends, and family were devastated. The proximity of the Circle K store to the military base made investigators suspicious that the person responsible may have had Army connections. This was only further solidified when it was revealed that the location where Karen's body was found served as a military training area. A .22 caliber shell casing was found on the ground roughly 12 to 15 feet away from where Karen's body was discovered, and detectives believed that the casing likely came from the direction where the shooter had been standing. They also noticed tire tracks pressed into the wet ground nearby. Those tracks were carefully cast and sent off for analysis, and the results pointed to a 1987 or 1988 GM vehicle, which was very common in the area and far from a home run. Of course, Karen's husband was the first person to fall under scrutiny, and he was polygraphed and he passed, and her family never believed he had anything to do with it. His 3 guns he owned were confiscated from the house, but none of them matched the .22 casing found at the scene. In December, just a couple of weeks after Karen's murder, a man falsely confessed to participating in parts of Karen's murder in an effort to deflect blame onto another person for a murder he had been charged with in a different part of the state. I know that's confusing, but in the end, while it all initially seemed promising, his account was quickly ruled out. After this, despite the outrage and fear in the community, Karen's case went cold. And at this point, there aren't any huge connections being made between Karen's case and that of Bambi Brantley's. The two have similar appearances, but Karen was found quickly, and what happened to Bambi was still undetermined. That would all change when, 6 months after Karen's abduction and murder, another young woman in the area would go missing. In late May of 1989, a young woman named Pamela Miller went missing. Pam had moved to the area just 6 months before all of this, and prior to moving to Leesville, she had lived with her mother in Colorado. Pam's sister Annette and her husband Craig ran a dry cleaning business in Leesville, and Pam was renting a spare room in their house from them. She was doing a few different part-time gigs. She was working as a physical therapist assistant for children with disabilities. She was providing aid service and transportation to a visually impaired school teacher, and she was working at a fast food restaurant. Like Bambi, Pam had an active social life and was casually dating. On the night she disappeared, she had gone into downtown Leesville to a club named Instant Replay to see a comedy show. Some witnesses recall seeing her speaking to a man there. After leaving, she drove to Lebo's convenience store on Louisiana Highway 28 to use the payphone. It's believed that she attempted to call her boyfriend, but he didn't answer, so she collected her quarter from the payphone and headed back out onto Highway 117 and then onto Gill Hunt Road where he lived. It should be noted that Pam was afraid to drive alone at night because back in Colorado, a friend had been abducted after her car broke down on a rural back road. And the car Pam was driving in Louisiana had a bad transmission, so she was very cautious about where she drove it and when. That night, she made it to her boyfriend Billy's property, but she never made it inside. Billy lived on a large property with a lot of acres, and it had an external gate that he kept locked. Pam's car was found there parked outside of the gate. Billy had not answered his phone that evening, and thus he wasn't expecting Pam to show up. And not to throw Billy under the bus here, but he had another lady friend over that night. This becomes important because he recalls seeing headlights of a car pulling up to his gate at around 12:15 a.m. that morning, but then the headlights backed out and turned around and drove off. At around 1, he left to go bring his companion home, and Pam's car was blocking the gate. According to Billy, he said he was concerned but thought something happened with her car. He knew about the bad transmission, so he thought that whoever turned around and left had been like her sister or someone else who had given her a ride when her car broke down. It also came up that he was trying to avoid the drama that would possibly happen if he said, "Hey, that's my girlfriend's car stuck here by this gate," to the girl he was with. So he just moved it and he drove her home, and he didn't call anybody until later that morning. He called her sister, who immediately knew something was off. Pam's car still had her purse on the seat, and the car was unlocked with the windows down. According to Pam's sister, Annette, who was interviewed on an episode of On the Case with Paula Zahn, she said, quote, "You could see her high heel prints from her car to the gate, and then you saw a man's size tennis shoe prints all around my sister's car. Her prints just stopped." End quote. I don't know the size of these prints. Is it possible that these men's shoe prints were Billy's from him moving her car out of the way? I don't know. Or was it more sinister than that? Was Pam followed and then ambushed when she got out of that gate? Did someone grab her and throw her into the vehicle, and those were the lights Billy saw turning around? The clues pointed to a really scary circumstance, literally everything Pam was afraid of driving alone at night. It was after Pam's presumed abduction that the public really began to draw parallels between these three women. Pam, Karen, and Bambi were all young blonde women. All three had been on the phone at a convenience store leading up to their disappearance and abduction. Karen from the phone inside the store, Pam and Bambi from a payphone outside a convenience store. All three happened late at night, and all three were newer residents to the area. But beyond that, they didn't have a ton to go on. The next break in any of the cases would come in late November of 1989, when another set of human remains were found. The summer and fall of '89 had proven to be a very rainy season in the Vernon Parish area of Louisiana. And by late November, the rain had washed away some mud in a remote location in Sabine Parish that revealed a shallow grave. The area is just outside of Vernon Parish, where Leesville is located, and it was, wait for it, a place that the military members from Fort Polk had trained. It was known as the Pisan Training Ridge, and it was not well known to people outside of the military. At the time, it was believed that the remains found could belong to Bambi Brantley or Pam Miller. It would take nearly a month, but in late December of 1989, dental records would reveal that the remains were those of Pam Miller. Because of decomposition, the cause of death could not be determined, but given that she was found in a shallow grave, the detectives treated the case as a homicide. Forensic options were limited at the time. With the investigation turning from a missing persons case to a homicide, detectives retraced Pam's last known movements and tried to get a sense of who she spoke to at the comedy club that night before heading to her boyfriend Billy's house. Not much is known about the investigation because limited info has been released by the Vernon Parish Sheriff's Department, who maintain jurisdiction in the investigation despite Pam's body being found in Sabine Parish. What they have said is that the man last seen speaking to her at the comedy club has been identified but has never cooperated with the investigation then or now. So just take that for what it's worth. In February of 1990, two young Leesville teens were abducted within days of each other. The first was the daughter of an Army sergeant named Tamika Walker. She had disappeared from a bowling alley on base. The next was Tammy Call. Tammy and a friend tried skipping school but were caught in the parking lot. While her friend made her way back into school, it's believed Tammy then went out a different exit to skip school further. Despite Tammy being at a rebellious age, her mother said she had never done anything like this. So you have to wonder who she might have known to meet or what the motive was behind this. Tamika was tragically found deceased in March, and within days, a suspect was identified in her case. 20-year-old Fort Polk soldier Reginald Green was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in her case. He had allegedly met Tamika the night she disappeared, and just to skip ahead, he ended up being found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and the details are super sketchy, but apparently he struck her in a sudden argument and caused her death. Her case was thought to be not tied to the others, but I mention it because, number one, well, Tamika mattered, and I want to honor her and not leave her out when discussing these other cases. And two, Having Tamika and Tammy go missing at the same time following these other 3 cases in such a small town, it really shifted the way policing happened in the community. They took to the papers to say that cases they would normally cast less suspicion on, they were treating with suspicion immediately. They were asking the public to report a missing loved one immediately with no wait time, and said that they would deploy all their resources as if each single one was an abduction. Which, of course, I'm a fan of regardless, but I know that limited resources with different agencies, that doesn't always work out. In similarity, like the other cases, with Tammy Call, they were able to identify that she had only been in the area for a short period of time. She had some military connection, and she had placed a call sometime before her disappearance. On the other hand, she was quite a bit younger, and she didn't look super similar to Bambi, Tammy, or Karen. As 1990 closed out, the area was in a state of constant hypervigilance. But after that, the cases would seemingly stop. 5 years of terror and uncertainty, with only one perpetrator caught who was thought to be unrelated to the other crimes. Years would pass with this hanging over the area, but in 1997, a break would change all of that. Two major things happened in 1997. The unfortunate discovery of Tammy Call's remains and a suspect identified in Karen Hill's murder. I'm doing these in reverse order, but I think you'll see why in a minute because the answer to Tammy's case could come from Karen's. So in late 1997, Tammy Call's remains were found in a remote area frequented by hunters near an area called Sandy Hill off West Boundary Road. The discovery ended the search for Tammy and any hope that she was still out there alive, but it only opened new wounds for her family. Who did this to a 15-year-old? Why? What do we do now? And investigators were pretty stuck at the time, too. But that's where it's important to talk about the break in Karen's case. Earlier in 1997, Karen Hill's mother received a mysterious phone call out of the blue. Karen's mother, Jessie, answered the phone to the voice of a man who would only identify himself as the name Angel. The person claimed he knew who had abducted Karen from the Circle K that early morning in '88. This Angel person had recently attended a military reunion get-together. In attendance was the roommate of another former military person named Samuel Galbraith. Samuel Galbraith was a soldier stationed in Fort Polk from December of '87 to June of '90. This roommate attending the reunion told the group that Samuel had told him that he had always had a fantasy about abducting, sexually assaulting, and killing a woman, just so he knew what it felt like. The roommate further shared that on the morning Karen was abducted and her body was found, Samuel had told him that he had carried out his fantasy. This Angel person who attended the reunion was understandably troubled by this information and decided to call Jessie, who immediately turned this tip over to law enforcement. Detectives were able to track down the old roommate, who confirmed the entire story. They said, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" And he just said, "I wasn't going to unless I was asked." That is incredibly frustrating, but also this does go to show you that when law enforcement says in these cases, "We believe the killer has told someone about this crime," this is what they mean. I've said that line on this show so many times in so many cases. And if you're a person listening to this episode and you know information about any case, do not make families wait for decades, or worse, never come forward. With this new information, investigators worked the previous ice-cold case. When they sat down for questioning with Galbraith, he denied knowing Karen or having ever interacted with her. When they asked him for a DNA sample, he said he didn't have anything to hide, but he also didn't want to provide a sample at that time. Unfortunately for him, that would not be an option because they had come prepared with a warrant. At that point, he surely knew it was all over. Galbraith cut a deal and pleaded guilty to manslaughter and attempted aggravated rape, and he was sentenced to 75 years in prison. Just as a side note, there's been some legal battles relating to his parole. Yes, parole already. Because he was a first-time offender, he was part of this early deal where he became eligible for parole really soon, almost a decade ago. And it was actually granted only for it to be revoked on a technicality within days of him getting out. He has been in legal battles over this ever since, but you're not going to find me feeling too bad for Samuel Galbraith. With him lined up as the perpetrator in Karen's case, investigators wondered if he could be possibly involved with the others. This is something they still wonder. They've named him an actual suspect, not a person of interest. And when asked about some of the other cases, all he said at the time was that he wanted a lawyer. But when it comes to Bambi's case, there's just one problem. He was not yet stationed there in the area when she went missing. So even though there are similarities to her cases and the others, it doesn't seem like Samuel could be the person who did this. After this, the next time Bambi's case appeared in the media was in 2018 when Sheriff Sam Kraft and his cold case team reopened the case, and they were hoping to spark conversation again, something I'm hoping to do today too. Since then, the case has continued to be spotlighted alongside the other unsolved cases like Tammy Calls, who was also reopened in 2018. The Army Criminal Investigations Division has also stepped in with these cases to assist the cold case team. Together, they are re-interviewing witnesses and seeing what forensic advancements might help in Bambi's case and the others. Bambi's large extended family is still keeping her front of mind, and they're offering a $5,000 reward for information leading to finding her remains or locating her killer, as they presume, unfortunately, that she is dead given the length of time. If you have any information on the disappearance and presumed murder of Bambi Luann Brantley, the person currently assigned to the case is Rhonda Jordan, and you can contact her at the Vernon Parish Sheriff's Office at 337-238-7248. You can also contact Crime Stoppers at 337-239-2233, where you can remain anonymous. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, and also share it with a friend. If you wish to support the podcast monetarily, my Spreaker Supporters Club is in the bottom of the show notes. You can click that link, and that gets you ad-free episodes when you're listening in the app or logged in on the website. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com, or just go follow me on Instagram and DM me there. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again next Monday.